Good morning, everyone. Lee Henson here from Agile Dad, and it's time for today's Daily Stand-Up. So as always, let's get started. My good friend Kamal writes, what do we do with new debt that accrues? How do we not become dependent on the technical debt sprint in order to get our work done? And this question is, of course, revolving around technical debt, and I think that this is a powerful question, and it may have been an oversight on my part. So let me explain. When we did our technical debt webinar, we had a really awesome opportunity to teach folks how to leverage the concept of a technical debt sprint. Now, for those of you who missed, I'm going to give you just a brief overview. A tech debt sprint to me says that one of the failure points that I see when handling technical debt is that teams or organizations like to say, let's set aside 10% of the time of our sprint or 20% of the time in our sprint to address technical debt. Let's allocate a predefined buffer, if you will, that we're going to use to address the debt instead of handling the debt and taking it on head on. What ends up happening is this creates confusion. People don't like the idea of having to try to balance out and figure out, well, let's see, if I'm going to be here 6 hours productive a day times 9 days, that's 54. So 10% would be 5.4 hours, but I'm taking 1 day off. It just becomes a mess to try to figure out exactly how much time you should dedicate for new work that comes in. And the penalty, or what winds up happening, is exactly what was described. The team will end up just letting the debt accrue and saying, oh, we'll take care of it at the tech debt sprint. So they'll wait for a series of months even and just let this debt build, which is not the intent of the technical debt sprint. I want to make sure I'm clear here. The intent of the technical debt sprint is to handle existing debt and to get your current debt down to zero. It's to take all those things that you had building in a technical debt backlog or a defect queue and to address those issues head on, to set aside a single 2-week sprint to focus on the top 10 issues that you need to address and to knock those top 10 issues out, whether they be defects or bugs, whether they be opportunities. I don't care whether it's an enhancement, an opportunity, a bug. I don't care what type of debt it is. We just want to take a 2-week period and hit that debt head on. And then we need to take any remaining debt that's outstanding, and we need to take the debt that's not going to fall into an urgent queue and mark it as known but not resolved. What this does is it takes that debt and it says, hey, we're aware of it, we're going to archive it. And if that debt should come up again, it's something we're going to address right away. The one piece that we didn't talk about, though, is how do you manage new incoming debt if there's a new defect or a new bug? And I don't want to go into too much detail here because we have a webinar coming up on this topic, but one of the concepts that I teach is a concept of something called Team John. And I've been in organizations where they call this the ninja team or the tiger team or whoever it might be, where they rotate one individual off of each team each 2 weeks. So they choose a different individual every 2 weeks. And that individual is responsible for running interference for the team so that the team can stay focused on the core work and that individual can handle new inbound debt. Now, that new inbound debt, if it's something that's mission critical, there's nothing saying we can't end the sprint and all hands on deck and, call for the emergency, state of emergency, if you will, and get all hands on deck and get everyone involved. I think it's critical for us to address the debt that way if it's that type of issue. There's nothing saying that we can't address debt immediately and that we must delay. I think another type of debt is what I call the majority of debt falls into this category. It's standardized debt. And what that means is, hey, we built this, and as a result of building this, we have some outstanding debt. And either it's something that needs to be addressed right now in this sprint because it has urgency, or something that could be queued up as a first item to be worked on in the next sprint. So it doesn't mean that we're never going to see a defect or a bug in our sprint. What it means is that we know how to address these defects or bugs as they go into our sprint. So we need to make sure we have a clear understanding of how we're going to address inbound work as opposed to putting off that inbound work. And I think the third type, or the third type of defect that comes in, is a defect that you don't really need to worry about. So I use the example of two very famous operating systems. Now, without saying any names, well, I guess I can say names because this is obvious. If you're using a Windows-based operating system and there's a defect, Microsoft takes great pride in making sure they address all those issues right away. So if somebody hits Control-Alt-Shift and hits the space bar 26 times and spins around in a circle and goes and the screen flickers, they want to make sure they address that right away, which, I understand, but I also don't understand. I mean, they definitely want to put the consumer's needs first. They think it's important. They'll launch an emergency response team to make sure they take care of the issue, and you'll have Windows update number 9647-.3, right? If you reported this very same defect to Apple and said, if I hold my Command-Alt-Shift, because there's no control, and well, there is control, but it's hardly used. So Command-Alt-Shift, and I have the opportunity, or Command-Option-Shift, I should say. That's the one I was looking for. And you hit spacebar 26 times, and the screen flickers, and you go, right? Same thing. The difference is, Apple's reply is, that's probably something we should look into. And what they'll do is they'll put it off until the next OS release. And I love that they do that, because what they realize is that this isn't severely impacting your ability to do anything else. And as long as it's not crippling you or putting you in a place where you can't use major key functionality, they are going to delay. And what they'll do is when they release the next OS, they'll go through this entire list of known but not resolved, and they'll pick out things that need to be addressed in the next OS. And that's why every release of iOS, every release of the Apple operating system is better and better and better. And it contains fewer and fewer defects, which is really interesting. But that's also the reason why you don't get as many frequent updates with Apple. You only get a handful, and usually those are either like life or death or security related or things along those lines. You don't see those that frequently. And I think, this is a good lesson to be learned when it comes to business agility, that if we're trying to handle technical debt, we need to make sure that we're doing two things. One, that we're addressing outstanding debt that's been there forever to lift that burden off of the team so the team can focus on things going forward. And two, that we have a plan in place to address new debt that's coming in. So we have a way to address those in-sprint interruptions. So we have a way to address inbound debt. And I think that if you combine those two, that's when you're going to find the greatest success. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer. And unfortunately, we're not able to address just one and not the other. These two go hand in hand and should be addressed together. It's not to say that you couldn't implement Team John without addressing the outstanding debt, and it's not saying that you couldn't address the outstanding debt without implementing Team John. But if you're just addressing the outstanding debt but you don't have a plan for inbound debt, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So you need to make sure you have both. So I hope you found this information useful. As always, we'll continue for the rest of the week answering your questions. So if you have a question, make sure you hit us up at learnmore@agiledad.com. We'd love to talk about your question specifically here in the podcast. So on behalf of all of us here at Agile Dad, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, stay agile, my friends. Until next time, take care.